And we'll throw to you.
Oh, we're recording.
Yeah.
Hey, the 1950s. A lot of people are like, what the fuck was even that, you know?
Sure.
You go, jazz. And the people just go, jazz, that's background music. And you go, no, that's because the movie industry has made it background music.
Mm-hmm.
So you tend to not think about it because it's background music, right? But the truth is, it's like the heaviest, most metal shit, punk rock shit in the world, right, Sean?
That's right.
Because what it actually is it's not background music, it's music. So get this, imagine just going to listen to this, not to have this in the background of a bustling city.
Uh-huh.
You're just staring at it, and this is what's happening. It's frantic, it's all over the place, it's unpredictable. It's the opposite of what music is, or was, up until that point.
Right. And it's never played the same two ways, right?
Hell no. And in a way, that was the 50s, and that's why it's not talked about much. People talk about the television of the 50s, but...
Yeah, I miss when the heroin addicts did this instead of just hanging out in tents in the streets of Portland.
Eisenhower was president
Hey, baby,
most
you
of
got
the 50s.
2 quarters on you.
Eisenhower was president, 53
Yeah,
to 61.
that's right, yep.
Uh-huh.
And people go, who is even that? That was a president?
This is the first Scott-led episode. And
This is the first Scott-led
we're
episode.
hoping that,
And the thing is, I think the 1950s are a forgotten time because the truth is we are fed the 50s through the media.
Mm-hmm.
Television media mostly. NBC, ABC, right?
Sure.
And those things, like all they really have to offer is what they had to offer at the time, which was Leave It to Beaver and all the shit that was on television. And those had censors, and it mattered, and it was scary to people. And so you got really corny shit. And so nobody talks about what was actually happening. They go, no, there's no real art. The fuck are you talking about, baby? Miles Davis started popping in the 50s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like real artists, these guys that everybody looks up to.
Mm-hmm.
So then it gets to the beat generation. No, we could keep playing this. All these goddamn beatniks, right? The beat generation. Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, 2 other guys that they had sex with as well. That's really what it was,
Right.
Oh yeah, you read on the road and...
They took out the gay sex. And
Well, they made him. Yeah, he
Yeah.
fought for it. So he wrote... Apparently, Jack Kerouac wrote On the Road...
Oh, really?
in 1951, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what he claims. It was 3 weeks in 1951 on a big long scroll, right?
Yeah.
The book was actually the length of War and Peace. But they cut it down to 323 pages.
So anyway, what is this fucking jazz song?
I don't know, but it doesn't sound...
Okay, we're back. Anyway, so where was I? Jack Kerouac, right?
Right, Kerouac took amphetamines, but they hadn't invented Twitter yet, so you just had to write a book instead of like a 50-tweet call-out.
Yeah, literally.
50-tweet call-out of your abuser.
Yo, this guy, first off, by the way, he wrote it in 51. The truth is, apparently he started it in like 47.
Mm-hmm.
Wrote it in 51 and then shopped it around, and just like you said, everybody was like, hey man, too much gay sex. I'm serious. Look it up, everybody.
Really?
Listening. Yeah. And he was like, what the fuck? He lived with his mom this whole time. This got me very excited because I recently got into jazz. Anyway, so he moved in with his mom. He's like living with his fucking mom, right? He's 35 and it finally gets published in 35.
Uh-huh.
And it's really because a lot of his homies are vouching for him.
Uh-huh.
A lot of these other beatniks start popping and they're like, he's great though.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, he doesn't really have much to show for it, right?
Right.
But the truth is, he had a book that had too much gay sex in it. And then finally in 57 they released it without a lot of the gay sex. But now you could buy it with a little bit of gay sex in
Is that
it.
true? Because
Yes.
I thought Kerouac was like closeted.
No, the character was... okay, I'm sorry. I'm not saying he was having gay sex in it. Other characters were.
Oh, okay.
You know?
Yeah.
Dean Moriarty.
Uh-huh.
You know? That man. Yeah, that's the
Right.
truth. And anyway, you listen to these guys. You listen to like a Kerouac or a Ginsberg, and they're fucking cool. Like I always thought they were losers or some shit.
Yeah, but that's a good bit you can do to your friend if they write a book and they want you to read it. You go, yeah, I liked it. There's just too much gay sex.
yeah.
It's like, no, it was about lighthouses. There's no gay sex. No, there was a lot of gay sex.
I think most. Well, didn't you say the Little Mermaid? Who's told me the Little Mermaid was about being gay or something?
not me. I don't know that any of that shit.
Yeah, well, the man who wrote the Little Mermaid wrote it because he was gay.
Yeah, it was like a metaphor.
Yeah, a metaphor for his gayness.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis' staffers told Scott that the Little Mermaid is about gay sex.
Well, anyway, we got sidetracked, but so like a story about on the road, right? Mm-hmm. So there are these people in the 50s, not just beatniks, but many other types who they put the freedom we apparently have in this country, right? They put it to the test, and what better way to do it than a fucking car, right? In the open road, because no one's really explored it other than like trying to get work. But now people are exploring it, trying to discover themselves. All these other guys, the gold rush, this and that. Now there's people who are just like, I don't know, let me think about myself, right? And have secret gay sex, and anyway, it also, what came with it was guys like Mort Sahl, who this is what the episode is about. It's about Mort Sahl, and
also Dick Gregory,
and a bunch of other guys who, for most of my life, I was actually told, oh, they're not even that funny. Yeah. Like Lenny Bruce, you go,
sure.
He's not even that funny. And well, guess what? I've listened to a bunch of it over this last week, and it's funny. We've been lied to. The reason we're told it's not funny is because they're kind of talking about real shit, and not so much Lenny. Lenny Bruce is just very much. It's like he's cursing, and I don't mean he's just cursing, but it is he's being arrested because he's saying things that are crass, and so it's a freedom of speech argument. Whereas Mort Sahl's issues come from genuinely trying to find truth and pointing out flaws in a country that is trying to tell everybody there is no flaws. And he's doing it in a time where he doesn't even know guys like Dick Gregory, they don't know television's role in the country.
Right.
All they know is, hey, it's here now. It must be an extension of America and its freedom that we apparently have. So let's get to it. And it turns out it's not. It's just a propaganda machine. You feel me, Michael?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were you saying? I felt you had a question.
Like, how does this tie into the beatniks having gay sex with each other?
Oh, well, they're just all part of it, Well, On the Road is... No, really, because it's a guy... So what he wrote it in the... Started writing it in 1947. This is when Kerouac would ride back and forth throughout the country and stuff. And I think it's a time that's not really talked about. Maybe it is, and I just go, ew. I always went, ew. I don't want to watch that. What's that about?
That's fair enough. I mean, we should just say with like Dick Gregory and Mort Sahl specifically, they're two comedians who were more famous than any comedian can be now because, again, there were 3 television channels. And so Mort Sahl and Dick Gregory were just famous on the 3 television channels. So you would go on and you would have 50 million, 60 million people watching you. And they got extremely rich very fast. Like in 1961, Dick Gregory was a black comedian who was making $5,000 a night in 1961 money. Like that's incredible today.
Wow.
And
he was making that on the road?
Yeah, or he would just do a show or do multiple shows and he'd make $5,000 in 1961 money. Or like Mort Sahl was a millionaire in the late 50s, early 60s. And essentially they both...
If I made $5,000 in one night, I would leave my family.
Essentially, they both gave it all up. Partly after the Kennedy assassination, they both became very skeptical of the official story. Dick Gregory also with the Martin Luther King assassination. He co-wrote a book with Mark Lane about FBI involvement in the Martin Luther King assassination. But the point is they both kind of were extremely rich, extremely famous, and they were both presented with the option to kind of stay that way, and they both instead chose to shake the boat because they were that committed to the truth. And I think they were both very funny comedians. But I guess, with my own kind of obsession with 9/11 and all that bullshit, I do think about them, and I do think about their, in my opinion, genuinely heroic example.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like,
It makes you scratch your head. You look back now and you go, how obvious, though? How is it only these few people bringing it up? And that was kind of part of Mort's reason for continuing to do this was like, no, I meet people. This is what they care about. Mm-hmm. The television is saying that's not what they care about. Sure. It's like after MLK died, the news just like reporting it the way they want to report it. So that the rest of the country acts the way they hope they act, you know? Yeah, so it says actually that Mort Sahl, when he started, it's pretty cool, Mike, because I saw you get sad because you were like, holy shit, they were rich. God damn it, I hate the story of a comedian, how it's like they do comedy, they're rich, right? But Mort Sahl has like the stories that you go, oh, great. Like, so I think he started doing comedy in 54 or something like that. And it was just him lying, his mother calling. Like, okay, so here's a story about him where like he's trying to get work as a comedian. He doesn't even know how to. So he like rents out a place and does sketches, and then no one goes to see it. They like lose a bunch of money. Yeah. His girlfriend, he just like follows her up to, or it's his wife at the time, and he follows up to San Francisco, and he tells this person like, I'm very funny, let me do a show. So he goes, okay, like do an audition. And he has all of his fucking friends come out and they laugh at him and stuff. Mm-hmm. And he goes, okay, $75, you can like do a show here. Mm-hmm. And, you know, went eventually. And then someone gets sick and he does the show and he bombs all the shows. Mm-hmm. And then the guys like want to fire him and stuff, you know? Mm-hmm. And then it's just he eventually got good. Mm-hmm. But you see, he had to like lie and be a loser. And his mom, his mom, this is how he really got big. His mom called a journalist and was like, hey, acted like someone else and was like, hey, or wrote a letter to a journalist and was like, there's this new awesome hot act.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was the nice thing when there were only 3 channels and like you only had to trick one person.
Right.
Yeah.
Like now you have to trick a lot of people through social media.
You have to trick thousands of people. You have to trick 100,000 people into thinking that you're, good.
Well, and then like, so, Mort Sahl, I guess, you know, coming up through Eisenhower and shit and the McCarthy era, that's what he would joke about all the time, right? Obviously. And they're like legit good jokes. I listened to a few. They're like genuinely funny, Sean. I don't know if you've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's like, I remember listening to Norm Macdonald, and he was like, "Oh, guys like Mort Sahl are shit. Like it's
right.
You know, it's too political." And then what you listen to it now, and it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And yeah, if you listen to it now, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. But if you're a guy who's like into history, say, and you read old books, or you watch documentaries about a period of time, it's really cool to listen to a Dick Gregory album or a Mort Sahl album.
Okay.
And you genuinely get like a chunk of that time. Like you get like, holy shit.
Yeah.
This is so deep into that year.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Dick Gregory album called Live at Kent State. I think it's like it's 1971. Which when did Kent State happen? 70, like or 71.
Yeah.
And it's just him being like, I wish I could say I'm happy to be here. And the fucking cover of the album is that dead girl from the Kent State.
Yeah.
I thought it's a guy that's dead, and there's a girl crouching.
She sure
over
looks
the...
like a girl that's dead, though, that's laying there. I know what you're talking about, the girl crying. But there's a girl that's dead on the cover photo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
but
that's just how good of a set Dick Gregory had at Kent State.
But you can actually listen to that on YouTube. It's like, it's good. Like, there's some parts where you go, what?
Yeah.
But also the parts that you go, what? It's just hack shit that people still do.
Right.
You know, like, hey, people in the cheap seats, you can hear me? And you go, what? Why would you even say that? But then he gets to some really good shit. And you're like, oh, goddamn. You know? Mort Sahl on like, what is that, Steve Allen? Was that his show before Carson? It was Steve Allen? Mm-hmm. Just actually talking about McCarthy and how he was going after everybody for communism and shit. Mm-hmm. It's really cool to see because I wasn't told. They just leave it out. They kind of leave that part out of the 1950s that like Steve Allen or like these late night shows were guys smoking cigarettes being like, hey man, isn't everything bullshit?
Yeah.
What the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
And that was so suppressed that we act like the first time people spoke up were like a bunch of hippies and most of them didn't know what the fuck they were saying. And that's what's cool about like a Jack Kerouac or something where they didn't like hippies. they fucking rule. Like they're actually, and what's so cool about anyone listening or even you two, like when you dive into a Dick Gregory or a Mort Sahl or a Jack Kerouac or even an Allen Ginsberg, like they talk like people that make sense, you know? They're not too far right, too far. They're not even in the center. Like they're just practical in a way that is it's from the 50s, and I'm going, holy shit, that's so refreshing.
Yeah.
And he's like talking about Eisenhower,
Right.
Eisenhower's jacket or something. You know?
Yeah, they call Kerouac the grandfather of the hippies or something like that, right? But he didn't like that.
No, he didn't line
label.
up. I mean, he, you know, but also with those guys, you never know. Like they don't want you to know anything about them.
Right.
So it's like, what is the truth? What's not, you know? But yeah, I think a lot of them really resent. And how do you not resent a guy like a John Lennon?
Well,
or
Kerouac
something?
was like, please tell these hippies to stop quoting me. I'm just a guy who drives a car and has gay sex.
Yeah. Jesus Lord.
The lost Kerouac letters.
Well, no, dude, imagine. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm just
Kerouac-
trying to get my dick sucked by...
Kerouac was like how Howard Stern thinks everyone's ripping him off. He thought the hippies stole gay sex from him.
Yeah.
But
Kerouac
okay,
was
like,
I'm just trying to get my dick sucked by a 15-year-old.
I don't know these men ages at the time, but I'm assuming they didn't serve in the war, right? Which you
No, I
think
think
they would.
I think they
But
missed it, right?
It's like
Yeah, Mort Sahl barely missed it.
right? It's like they all somehow barely miss it. And what you get from that is you don't get this allegiance to the war because you
Right.
didn't serve. And so you don't have this blind loyalty.
Were they before
And
the war
so-
or after?
No, they're after the war.
After the war.
World War II, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they're after. And so they're in the 50s. And so and this is totally, I'm guessing and rambling.
No, but did they miss the draft or they were too old?
Oh, I
No,
don't
Mort
know
Sahl
what it
was
is.
too young. He
Too
tried
young,
to
yeah.
enlist when he was 15,
Okay.
and then his mom found out, and she
Oh,
wouldn't
and she
let him.
dragged his ass out.
And then eventually he was in the Air Force, but he wasn't in the Air Force until the war ended.
My grandfather did the same thing. He lied about his age to enlist, and then did. I think that was like a popular thing.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, back before the internet, you just had no idea about Iwo Jima.
Yeah, or
You
ages.
could just get a fake ID and then go get your head blown off.
Dude, there should be a story about that. Like the 9-year-old who had a mustache who was in World War II. That definitely fucking happened.
Yeah.
Like a 10-year-old Dominican kid who fought in the war.
Yeah, just like he lines up like 50 POWs and machine guns them all down.
Hey, I ain't freaking yellow.
Yeah. Yeah, the little rascals. Enter World War II.
He got a fake ID for his dog. too.
Right.
Yeah. Pete the
Yeah,
Pup.
he's on the MG-42 and another soldier's changing his diaper, burping him.
But I think what happens with guys who
He's like, the sergeant's like, whoa, we don't let blacks in this unit. You think he's gonna say he's a kid, but they just send buckwheat to the other unit.
Yeah. Well, anyway, because what happens after goddamn World War II, this is what I know of it, is the Soviets beat the Nazis.
Yeah.
And we beat the Japanese.
Yeah.
And then the war ends, right? And so you go, good job, Russia and the U.S., and wouldn't everybody think that? But then all of a sudden, we're enemies. And Germany is like on our side, right? We're cool with the Germans.
It gets split into East and West,
Yeah,
and then West
right.
Germany becomes part of NATO and the Western
Sure.
Alliance.
Anyway, anyone who has any sense would go, wait, if what you told us about World War II is true, shouldn't we be partying with the Russians right now? And now we win and we save the day? I mean, they beat the real problem. They beat the fucking Nazis, not goddamn Flavor Flav, not the hype man. Japan was the hype man of, of Chuck D.
Well, that was a
which
big
was
saying that
Nazi
Hit-
Germany.
Okay.
Yes. And anyway.
What was Mussolini then?
I don't know. I don't know too much about Mussolini. I gotta look into him.
Okay.
But so you would go like, well, shouldn't they be buddies and stuff or whatever? And then you realize they're not, and you go, well, then what is happening? And people start questioning these things, these cool guys, and they go, this doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism was, because when the Soviet Union was allies with America in World War II, there was just a lot of films and newsreels and not glorifying the Soviet Union to American audiences. just saying like, hey, here's all they've achieved. Like they industrialized, their agriculture is through the roof. It was like a backwards country in the 1920s, and within a decade they turned it into an industrial power that was the greatest in the world. And so Americans would go to the theaters and they would see the newsreels and they would see all that, and they would see.
That was when the communists took over?
Well, during World War II.
Yeah.
But, Joseph Stalin, industrialization in the Soviet Union was from about 1929 or 28 to 41 until the Nazi invasion. And within a decade, it was a country with almost no industrial power whatsoever, and they became the greatest industrial power of the entire world. And
that's because of slaves, correct?
Well, because
the gulags.
They collectivized the agriculture, which set off a famine, which, people will put various X million people died. I don't think Stalin deliberately did a famine, but regardless, they collectivized the agriculture. So instead of a bunch of, individuals holding their little farm plots, the state controls agriculture now. And once you have the state controlling agriculture, you can centrally direct stuff, and that's what allowed them to industrialize. So within a decade, they become the greatest industrial power on earth at that time. And that's the only reason they defeated the Nazis, because they were able to build so many T-34 tanks because of industrialization.
Holy shit.
When the U.S. and the Soviet Union were allies during World War II, the newsreels and the newspapers and all that would essentially say this kind of thing to the U.S. public. Uncle Joe, as FDR called him. These were our allies. It was kind of talked about what a miracle the Soviet Union has achieved in state planning and all that. And then after World War II ends and FDR dies, McCarthyism is partly a backlash to all that, because a lot of the FDR administration people who were kind of associated with this pro-Soviet Union policy get accused of being communists. Like the Alger Hiss, for example, is accused of, he was like a New Dealer. He's accused of spying for the Soviet Union, and Richard Nixon makes his career investigating him and all that. So that's like a big part of McCarthyism, is everyone who is associated with this policy of like the Soviet Union is good, the Russians are our friends, they help us beat the Nazis, is like tarred and feathered as a communist. Everybody has to take loyalty oaths, even if you just want to like write on TV or just, work at a TV station, you have to sign a loyalty oath that you're not a communist, or you've never been a and so it's just like,
but McCarthy isn't that was just one guy doing all that?
Well, that's the thing. Peter Dale Scott, who I talk about a lot, but he's written about Joseph McCarthy was the senator from Wyoming, and he got his career going on the Senate, or he made his career going on the Senate floor and saying, I have a list of, 50 communists in the State Department or whatever, but...
There's 50 men who had sex with his wife.
Yeah.
Very upset about it.
But Peter Dale Scott makes the argument that essentially Joseph McCarthy was getting his list from J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI. So it's not like... Essentially, Joseph McCarthy was just a senator who was a vehicle for other people who, wanted to create a communist backlash. And he was a good kind of public-facing lightning rod to kind of set this off. And, various people in the military or the FBI kind of helped him out and helped out other anti-communists, but it was just kind of, they were trying to circulate this backlash to communism to not only purge all of the people who were not even pro-Soviet Union, but just like neutral or like willing to work with them, or, oh, they're still our allies, 20 million Russians died, we should, be friendly with them. Just essentially they wanted to purge all those people from the government, but they also wanted to launch a propaganda campaign to kind of undo everything that was done and said to the U.S. public during World War II. And that's, it was largely successful.
Well, hot damn. So then you got, cool cats.
Yeah.
Like Mort Sahl talking about it on television, right? He's got a joke he says about, and apparently people would argue, would be like, this communist, he worked at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco consistently. And
what's that?
People, it was like a jazz club. They didn't have comedy clubs at the time, so it was just a place with a stage that he would work at. And he became really friendly with the owner. Actually, eventually, we could just jump around with him, but eventually he did, he became John F. Kennedy during the election so I guess he was Senator Kennedy at the time.
Mm-hmm.
John F. Kennedy's dad, Joe Kennedy, asked Mort to write jokes for John's campaign, and Mort became friendly with him, with John F. Kennedy. So during Eisenhower's run, he made fun of Eisenhower, and Nixon was vice president. Look at that. And so he would make fun of them. Fuck these guys. He knew everything about them, and because he'd go on stage. Like, sorry, I'm skipping a bunch. And this is another thing. He's such an authentic comic, and so is like a Lenny Bruce, that I think we go, they're not funny. They're just talking. It's because so much of us are so used to jokey bullshit, late night shit, that we've forgotten they are actually telling jokes, and they're just hiding them. So you're listening to Mort Sahl, and it is a little wordy, and some of it can definitely be removed, and there's like an anxiety to it almost, where he's like too smart for his own good, where he's like adding in things he doesn't need to, having little side steps where he doesn't need to, but when he gets to the joke, it's way better than most people's shit, period. So
Yeah, I mean, we should just say, though, a lot of the listeners might know, but Mort Sahl basically invented modern American stand-up comedy. He would just kind of take a newspaper and, read some newspaper articles and bring it on stage and kind of comment on the news. So most of the kind of, let's say, Tonight Show monologue kind of stuff, that all comes from Mort Sahl. Most modern stand-up comedians come from Mort Sahl. Woody Allen, who's, his stand-up's still very funny. But he says he only was able to start because he saw Mort Sahl. And it was like that inspired him.
He feels like a guy. Honestly, it feels like how Chappelle feels. And I'm not saying like content-wise. I'm saying where you go, he's just hanging out talking. And it's like, no, that's not what's happening. He's doing that jazz thing. He's hiding it from you. You know? You think he's being background noise right now and just chilling. But he's blowing everybody's mind.
Yeah, I don't think that's something I could ever do, to do comedy that way. And also like
You've got to be half retarded, I think.
You have to be. There has to be some. You have to have some kind of like crazy ego, I think. I mean, I've seen, like, I pursued stand-up comedy because I saw other people do it. But who would if stand-up comedy didn't exist, like, who would invent it? Who would be that crazy to be like, there's a room full of people and they all want to hear what I have to say?
Oh, for sure.
It would be invented by a guy looking at Instagram and saying, "There's not enough crowd work videos here. There's not enough. There's not enough people. There's not enough comedians asking the person in the front row, "Are you two dating? How long have you been dating?" And then finding out that it's a friend zone situation and commenting on that.
Yeah.
Dude, I want to be Mort
brother
Sahl.
and sister.
What are you saying?
Brother and sister. You get his brother and sister.
Yeah, there's not enough 30-second clips labeled wacky mix-up when brother and sister asked if they are dating at a comedy show.
Just big yellow font guy in the friend zone.
That happened to me and my sister in the front row.
Did it?
Yeah. Julian McCullough was like, "Are you guys dating?"
Yeah,
like,
and then the comedian said, "Raise your hand if you fucked this woman," and everyone in the club except Scott did.
No. Dude, I'm gonna be.
You guys have like the exact same face.
I'm gonna be Mort Sahl, but I bring up a National Enquirer, but I act all serious about it. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me with this Bat Boy.
So it looks like the fucking aliens got Elvis again, huh?
Yeah. Oh, the ghost of Patrick Swayze is harassing Whitney.
Well, folks, Jean-Benet Ramsey alive and spotted in Wyoming, huh?
We got to do something about this Jimmy Hoffa on the grassy knoll, all right?
Yeah.
This fucking guy thinks he can kill every president.
Now, was his act prepared or was it improvised?
Definitely some prepared. Definitely some improvised. No matter, he does a thing that I love that great comics do. I'm going to shout out a comic I love very much, Jamar Neighbors, right? Who he has a special that just came out recently. He does a thing that, whether it's true or not, I love it, is he puts himself in it, whether he wasn't in it or not, I guess is what I'm saying, where he's like, so Jamar used to have a joke about where he's like, so, like me, I'm doing a drive-by. Like he has a joke about how he's doing a drive-by with his friends.
Yeah.
And you go, no one's placing themselves there, and Mort does it. It's like a little trick, I think, where you go, oh, that's a fun comedy trick. People should do that more. And Mort Sahl, his little trick that I noticed he does is he credits people with jokes, which like nobody likes to do. So he'll go, then this one reporter said this.
Yeah.
And since he's like a very serious guy who's been in rooms with the Kennedys and Nixon and Reagan and everybody, people like tend to believe him, so he'll be like, and then this guy said this, then this guy said this, and he's giving the punchlines.
The punchline, yeah.
But he's like crediting it to senators or this person or that person.
But it's like a sketch that he wrote.
But it's like a sketch. It's literally a sketch he wrote. And what he kind of did was he wrote sketches and no one ever gave a fuck.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, how do I get my plays? His father was a playwright, and then he kind of wrote sketches. No one gave a fuck.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like, oh, I'll just do my sketches as monologues. And so he'd go up and do his sketches as monologues. Yeah.
I like Jamar's bit about how, I guess, meerkats like make each other laugh. He's like, what if we put our best comedians against the best meerkat comedian? Like, coming to the stage, Dave Chappelle. He's like, and now, let's hear from this meerkat. And he's like, it's so stupid.
So anyway, he gets hired by, so, you know, in the 50s, he's shitting on the guys who were in power, which is Eisenhower, Nixon, right?
Uh-huh.
And then he I'm not saying he helps get Kennedy elected. Kennedy is Kennedy.
Right.
But, you know, he helps write his jokes.
Yeah,
Kennedy
it was
actually
mainly,
wasn't-
It was mainly the Chicago outfit that helped get Kennedy elected.
Yeah. Don't do Italian erasure on this show. Well, Kennedy wasn't always a great public speaker. He was kind of like shy, and when he was in Congress, he was kind of unremarkable. But he lost his brother in World War II.
I am a small bean. I
he
have
lost his brother
anxiety
and then-
and I am neurodivergent.
Wait, he lost his brother in World War II?
Yeah, his brother died in World War II, so he was like, he gave some speech about losing his brother that was what made him connect with people.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But he wasn't like naturally charismatic.
Huh.
Yeah,
It took a minute.
took a minute.
Well, hot damn.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so Kennedy gets elected, you know, and Mort Sahl starts making fun of Kennedy, and and John Kennedy's
Oh, so he turned
dad-
on him. So then,
He didn't
Well,
turn
that's-
on him. He just is telling you. That's what's so
turned
cool
on-
about Mort Sahl. It's like when you
Right.
when you find out how he's talking to these guys the whole time, he doesn't give a fuck about any of them. Like he's just chilling. He's there to make fun of
He's just
them and
going for the
write
laugh,
jokes. And then he's like, I'm out. There's a moment where what do you call those things where comics? Roy Wood Jr. just did it. The White House Correspondents' Dinner, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't seem to be that, but it's like a clip of him talking to a bunch of important people, and he explains how someone was like, would you like to meet the president? And he was talking about how it's like you're a little kid, like, would you like to meet the president? And the way he talks about it was so actually funny and so genuine and so like, oh yeah, this is a guy who could give a fuck if it's he knows the president is just another man. So he seems like a real ass dude. Not in like a Luis Gomez way, in like a, you know, in like a guy, in a real guy way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he didn't turn on Kennedy. He was just, he never cared about Kennedy in the first place. Yeah, he's a nice guy. Like, he liked him in that way, you know?
Right.
He starts to care about him. We should probably jump to that because we're going really long. But eventually, Kennedy apparently doesn't turn on him, but his father does. He starts losing work because he is making fun of John F. Kennedy. His manager, who knew Kennedy's dad, Joe Kennedy, said, you know, hey, the big man's not happy, talking about Joseph Kennedy.
Wow.
And he was like, you better stop what you're saying, or...
what was he making fun of Kennedy for?
That's the other thing. It's like horseshit. It's all, none of it is like scary.
Right.
You know, none of it is even as, you know, the McCarthy stuff is like legit. Like, oh wow, I could see a man getting in trouble for that. You know.
Oh yeah, I think Mort Sahl had a bit that he did where he said he was saying like, oh, he's making fun of, I don't know, Leave It to Beaver or one of those shows, or doing a parody of it, and he says, and then Jack Kennedy comes in the kitchen. And they say, they ask him, what do you want to do when you grow up? And he says, I want to be president. And they said, yeah, what do you want to do when you grow up? Or something, joke, Jack
Yeah,
Kennedy's
like he's young. It's
yeah.
like, it was stuff like, it was so simple and, you know, pretty generous to him for the most part. Also because he like genuinely believed that he wanted to change the country and stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, he said, you know, like, it's going to feel like a house fell on you. Apparently, that's what Joe Kennedy told his manager, you know.
It would be funny.
To
It's
tell
like
more. And,
doing those
Oh,
kinds of
if he doesn't lay off?
yeah, and then the Hungry Eye, which, you know, Mort would perform at constantly, got a bill from the government for...
Joe Kennedy being like, I know bootleggers and I will have you fucking killed if you say my son is a young man again on TV.
Yeah, the Hungry Eye was had to owe $490,000 to the government out of nowhere.
He audited him.
yeah, because Mort was making fun of John F. Kennedy.
But you're saying, did JFK know about that, you think? Or
Well, so apparently, this is what Mort says.
Yeah.
So we should post the link to the documentary that, did I mention that Bill Hicks brought up? There's like this old Bill Hicks, any Bill Hicks fans, there's like this YouTube clip that I'm sure you've watched where he's like being interviewed by like a public, it's like a college radio thing, but someone calls in and they're like, hey, you're like one of those Mort Sahl kind of guys. And he's like, oh, I actually just watched a PBS documentary, and he's a real hero. And so I found the PBS documentary.
Yeah, any Bill Hicks fans, it's 90 degrees in the summer, so it's time to take off your trench coat now.
And so I'll post the link to that on the Patreon at the very least.
Sure, yes.
Yeah. Okay, whatever.
There's a PBS Mort Sahl. There's a couple different Mort Sahl documentaries.
Yeah, but this
There's
one
a
is hot
PBS one.
fire, dude.
Yeah, and I also watched, we'll talk, if we don't get to it here, we'll talk about it on the Patreon, but I watched, there's a Showtime documentary on Dick Gregory called The One and Only Dick Gregory on Showtime, and it's just, it was very funny to me. It's 2 hours long, and it just completely omits and erases everything to do with the Kennedy assassination, the MLK assassination, where it's like, if that was a minor part of his life, I would understand, but Dick Gregory was literally the first person to show the Zapruder film, the Kennedy assassination film, on television. It's a major historical event, and Showtime just kind of skips over it, or like, they don't even skip over it, they just don't mention it. And that's one of those things where Showtime's the show that aired Homeland, which was a collaborative effort with the CIA.
Sure.
They've aired, the worst documentary in the Afghanistan war I've ever seen, which was just all CIA spooks being interviewed.
What's that? Generation Kill?
No, it's called like The Longest War or some bullshit title like that. I just had to turn it off because it was like supposed to be a 2-hour Showtime documentary about American Afghanistan, and it's just like, first 20 minutes. Interview CIA analyst. Right. Interview CIA on the ground office. And it's just like CIA.
What's the thesis of the documentary?
Well, I turned it off because it was like 25 minutes and it was just rambling. And it's just like that kind of content just sort of exists to fill the thing where it's like, hey, I'm bored. I want to watch something about Afghanistan, and then you'll watch it, and then the CIA will tell you a bunch of, oh, it's really complicated and everybody tried their best, but things are hard. They're just going to skip over like, oh, hey, we set up like pedophile, drug dealer, warlords.
Right.
Everybody is shooting at us because we put pedophiles in power.
Right.
Everyone on our payroll is like the third largest heroin trafficker in the world. It has 4 little boys chained to their bed, and we're giving them Viagra so they can rape them. So it's just.
We thought they said they love toys. We thought they said they like to have sex with toys.
Right.
That got lost in the.
But if we don't get to it on this one, I'll talk on the Patreon and give a bit of an overview of Dick Gregory's life. But I just found that really astounding that you can like do a 2-hour documentary and then just cut out one of the most essential and important chapters in his life.
Yeah, that's insane. That's crazy. And getting back to you about did John F. Kennedy make this happen? Apparently no. So, I guess like every president, there's a bunch of people who run to you and go, hey, I heard someone is doing this. Let me handle it. And it's just like a thing that someone can go handle to impress the president.
Sure.
And so Mort said every time he saw John, he said even before he was assassinated, he did a show in D.C. and Bobby and John went to visit him, or, they hung out and talked, and they were always very cool, and John understood people with a good sense of humor. He's like very pro John F. Kennedy, and we'll get to that in a few seconds because he's like very pro John F. Kennedy. More than these people who turn on him when he starts making jokes about Kennedy and, think he's a complete dickhead. So now Kennedy gets assassinated, right? And Mort Sahl is like, he has some questions like everybody does. But all of a sudden, no one's allowed to ask questions. And what Mort Sahl is, he goes up with the newspaper, and talks. So now all the newspapers for like a year, 2 years, all they say is John F. Kennedy was killed. So that's all he's got to talk about. And so he does. And eventually a radio station, I think in 1966, 67, a radio station asks him to he reads the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission came out in 64?
Yeah.
So he starts bringing the Warren Commission on stage. He makes fun of it, stuff like that, right? This radio station he was working for, because he still was working, on radio, and I think he had like a show here and there. He would do a show on television, but they had him go down to meet this. What was his name? Garrison.
Yeah, Jim Garrison.
Jim Garrison in New Orleans, right? Mm-hmm. And they said, hey, this is 1966, 1967. Mm-hmm. They're going, this guy is investigating the JFK assassination. He thinks it's the CIA. Why don't you go down there and interview him?
Yeah,
like a lot of comics do. Like, you see every comic put a microphone to someone's face and think they figured it out and got him, but they're just interviewing. Like,
they're like, we heard Kevin Costner is going to play this guy in a movie. It might be good for your career to get down there.
Yeah. Okay. So I've never seen the JFK movie, but apparently, when was that made? In the 80s?
91.
91. Okay.
Wait, so they sent Jim Garrison to interview Mort Sahl?
Wait, no. Mort Sahl went down to interview Jim Garrison.
Okay,
yeah. As part of the radio,
because he knew about.
Because he knows about the JFK. He knew JFK. He cared about the assassination. He thinks it's important.
Right.
But he was still being, funny enough to still have a radio station and a radio show, stuff like that. Accepted by some people still. And then he goes down and he visits this Garrison guy, and he wants to help. And he's like, "What can I do?" And he gets fucking deputized by Garrison, and he goes to work for him for quite some while, right? Until like 71, I think, or something like that. He with his own money, he interviews people, flies places, interviews eyewitnesses of the murder, people who have met Oswald, Kennedy, this and that. And then I think he got in a bunch of trouble. I wrote it down, but do you want to talk about?
Well, he took depositions and such. Mort Sahl did. I mean, he was one of the biggest comedians in the country, and then after the Kennedy assassination, he just kind of put it all on hold to go become an official part of the only criminal trial that was ever done in the Kennedy assassination, that of Clay Shaw, who was indicted by Jim Garrison in New Orleans. Jim Garrison was the New Orleans district attorney, and he indicted Clay Shaw over his involvement in the Kennedy assassination, and Clay Shaw was acquitted, though later we learned he was a CIA agent, and he did have contact with Oswald and these people. But, Mort Sahl, he talks later, I really like, there's a YouTube channel, Our Hidden History. Everything on there's great, but they have a fair number of Mort Sahl, like radio interviews, like Scott was mentioning. Mort Sahl's radio interviews in the late 60s, early 70s are great because he's just really sharp, really smart. He just doesn't give a shit. And he kind of calls people out very, very directly. Like, Mort Sahl, he says something to the extent of like all these liberals who like loved Kennedy and kissed his ass while he was alive. He's like, well, you're the ones who liked the guy, and now you don't care at all that he's dead and he's murdered. You don't care who killed him. You just want to move on. And like Mort Sahl says, he talks about Bill Cosby, and he says, I'm blacker than Bill Cosby because Bill Cosby doesn't care about who shot Martin Luther King.
But Mort Sahl said that?
Mort Sahl said that. He's a bad motherfucker.
He says that James Earl Jones does, he doesn't care because Mort Sahl would go on these panel shows, and he would bring up, hey, there are holes in this Martin Luther King investigation, or like, this does not seem like James Earl Ray acted alone or even pulled the trigger. And he would just go on these panel shows and say it, and he talks on these radio interviews about, everyone would just shut down and just, James Earl Jones has to protect his Hollywood career.
Right.
They're not going to say that, and, Bill Cosby and all that. And so, the guy didn't give a fuck, and he was very committed to the truth, and he cost himself a lot of money in it.
It makes you wonder, like, what if Hollywood was run by good people instead of
cool people?
Like the worst people? Yeah.
But it is something where it's like, with Mort Sahl, they just kind of say, oh, he got boring on stage and started reading the Warren Commission, but I don't think that happened. I think this audience still loved it because the Warren Commission was absurd, and you can find plenty of absurdities in it. I think it was just something where they put him on TV a lot less, and I think he was still funny. Everything I've seen of him is still funny until like the 70s. Though I will admit, Mort Sahl by like the 80s, he's kind of starts to get a little tired and hacky.
Right. It is hard. It's rare that you see political comedy done well. I feel like there's only a handful of people.
No, this is genuinely done well because he is so not being jokey. If he was being jokey, it would probably suck. But since he is more relaxed, yeah, there's more sentences you have to get through, but the actual jokes within what he's saying is like it's great commentary. It's very, very funny. Okay, it's like so after the Kennedy assassination, he'd go on stage and hold a photo of Oswald being shot. And then he would say, this is a photo of Lee Harvey Oswald being shot while he was being guarded by 123 members of the Dallas police force, or 124 if you count Ruby. So he was saying shit like that, and people are like, "Pow! What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Talk about like Sinead O'Connor getting in trouble for ripping a picture of the Pope or whatever.
Right.
This is a guy, showing a graphic photo on stage.
And then Joe Pesci went and put it back together and like, actually, Sinead, it's good that those kids were molested.
Did that happen?
Yeah, the week after Sinead was on, Joe Pesci was on SNL, and he put the picture of the Pope back together.
That's great.
Because he's Italian, and it's important that those kids get raped, and
We're
nobody
so
supports them and believes them.
Stupid. Well, Sinatra was like, "I'm gonna kick her ass."
And so in
I'm gonna put
1967,
that woman's fucking head through a wall.
I know a hole in the
dead.
desert where there's 3 hookers already. She can go next to it.
in 1967 he had like this show that was supposed to run on Broadway, just called Mort Sahl.
Yeah. I guess people don't like being when their stuff is when things they believe is challenged. I guess people are comfortable.
Yeah. I think people just don't like to think about stuff. They kind of
People don't
want
like to
you
think
to shut
about
the
stuff.
fuck up.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but it's too quick of a reaction
Yeah.
to make any actual sense. You know,
Sure.
it's just like, oh, you're suppressing something.
Well, it's what I found.
Nerves.
I mean, it's what I found so fascinating about both Mort Sahl and Dick Gregory is, like we mentioned, most everyone in Hollywood after the Kennedy and after the Martin Luther King assassination, even if they personally were like, that story's bullshit. Well, they got families. They got probably a nice house. They don't want to go back and get a fucking day job. They're millionaires. So they're like, we're going to go along to get along. And in my opinion, you see plenty of that today with 9/11 or...
Somebody approaches Bill Cosby like, you better shut up about this Martin Luther King assassination or no more rapes for you, buddy.
Or, Noam Chomsky, just today it came out. He was, for some reason, transferring $270,000 through Jeffrey Epstein. Which is like, it's weird enough you're hanging out with a guy who is a registered sex offender. Why are you giving him $250,000? What the fuck does he have on you? And Chomsky's a guy who's always said, oh, the Kennedy assassination, it doesn't matter, but the government didn't kill him.
Really?
9/11, who cares who did 9/11? It was probably the official story, et cetera, et cetera. Just like these guys who just back up the official story, and a lot of them are rapists and pedophiles, but not all of them are rapists and pedophiles. Most of them are probably just, even if they question the official story, they have a nice lifestyle and they don't want to challenge it and they don't want to think about it too much. Right. And then you do have these rare individuals like Mort Sahl and Dick Gregory.
Parenti.
Yeah, Michael Parenti would be a great example. But essentially, they put their livelihoods on the line. Like, with Parenti would have been as famous as Noam Chomsky. He would have had $270,000 to give to Jeffrey Epstein if he just went along. But instead, he questioned the Kennedy assassination. He questioned 9/11, and he marginalized himself. These 3 individuals lost a lot of fucking money.
Right.
If they just kind of changed their views, they would have made a lot more money. And there was...
I like to think that me and you marginalized ourselves at some point.
It is, and you know what? I will admit, it is a nice little cope to kind of think in the back of your head,
nice
like,
little cope,
if I could just fucking let go, if I wasn't so addicted to telling the truth, I could have made it like any of these other suckers.
Right.
But it.
So, it's because I love the truth too much.
That's exactly it.
That's why I'm borrowing money from my father.
But okay, so let's just take Mort Sahl and Dick Gregory. Okay, they made it. They were, as we mentioned, millionaires in the 60s. And they threw it all away. And and they did that extremely brave, extremely rare thing. And what's fascinating to me, it's like, even if you do that, even if you do the right thing, you use all your power and influence to try to push back against the tide of history and tell the truth, after you die, they can still just rip out your legacy and marginalize you. And that's what
Right.
annoyed me about that Dick Gregory documentary is
Right.
like they just completely cut that part of his life out. It was
Right.
just like he's just a generic black stand-up comedian. Nothing
Right.
about MLK, nothing about JFK. And then with Mort Sahl,
It's almost like they're better off not making the documentary.
but like
it does more damage, right, to his. It
Yeah.
almost like dilutes his legacy.
yeah,
To make that documentary.
Well, that's the thing. It's just they can just hide whatever you did from the next generation, or they can present it in a particular way. Like with Mort Sahl, they just say, "Oh, he was ranting about the Warren Commission on stage." No, he wasn't. He was still funny, but he was just talking about things that nobody else would talk about, and that made him kind of persona non grata.
Yeah, and that's what he said. Where it was, there's this great line at the end of the documentary where he's like, "If you cut out the middleman, everything's all right," and he's talking about television or all these people that were able to blacklist him, because when you do see him on stage, people are laughing and they love it. Him and Dick Gregory were actually touring in like the 90s together, and even like 2017 or some shit, they had shows together. I saw or something like that, and I was like, wow, goddamn,
Yeah.
that is really, really cool.
Yeah, get your Viagra for that ticket.
Well, it's unfortunate that we don't know as much about them because they've sort of been pushed into the background a little bit, and very much intentionally.
Yeah,
I mean, like,
yeah, I think so. But yeah, the whole time period is like weirdly pushed.
Yeah.
It's all just like they,
I didn't
everyone
really
likes
know
to talk about
anything
the
about-
hippies, and even like Vietnam is like still very much talked about. And I guess Kennedy being killed was, but nothing in detail. Like I never knew that people were talking like this about these things.
oh yeah,
At
Yeah.
the time, you just
Right.
go, oh.
there was just no internet, so it wasn't. I guess it wasn't. It was harder for people to.
Yeah, but it is
communicate.
exactly. So to suppress these questions that people had, it's super easy in terms of turning on the television. But if you walk
Right.
around and talk to people,
Even when 9/11
everyone's kind
happened-
of scratching their head, going, "Hey, what the fuck happened to the president?"
Right.
And that's what Mort Sahl was doing. He was just being a person.
Right. Because when 9/11 happened, there wasn't much of an internet. There wasn't enough of an internet for it to be like a.
Yeah, no, we got
Spread.
remember,
I
and
mean-
God bless him. Harry Belafonte just passed away, but we got that Taliban song, "Come, Mr.
Oh,
Taliban."
yeah,
That's
yeah.
like all we got. The internet was that far.
There was that,
after
yeah. No, it was a flash
9/11.
game where you could hit Osama bin Laden with various bats.
Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
like, "Come, Mr. Taliban,
Hand over bin Laden.
Yeah.
hand over bin Laden," and then you just massacre him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a Newgrounds game where you could give Viagra to our new allies.
But anyway, in 1967. So anyway,
That you got a bat and you have to prevent the child slaves from escaping for freedom and democracy.
Joe Kennedy really stuck a dick in him after he started making jokes about John. Ba ba ba.
Oh, what was he, a 14-year-old?
John eventually gets killed. Mort starts questioning that, right? So less and less on television, but whatever. In 1967, he's going to have a show on Broadway, and in it, there's a sketch about the Warren Commission, and then all of a sudden, like 2 weeks before the show or some shit like that, 2 days before the show, it gets pulled and canceled. And the sketch about the Warren Commission, it just used lines from there's no written words but lines from the Warren Commission, which I love because South Park also did that with explaining Mormonism, right? And it's like, this is exact, like we didn't change anything. And I love it is such a great way to joke about something, is just handing you the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Richard Nixon, or just talking about Joe Kennedy, but Richard Nixon gives some interview in the 70s or 80s, and he just offhandedly tells this anecdote, like, I was on an airplane, and Joe Kennedy was there, and he was there with a 17-year-old young woman, and I went up to him, and he said, this is my niece. And I know the Kennedys. That was not his niece.
Dude, Nixon is my mom, I think.
Yeah.
My mom
He was
talks like
funny when he
Nixon.
wanted to be, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Nixon was
just
a funny
talking
guy.
shit. Just everybody is just,
Yeah.
can you believe them?
Yeah.
But also, I mean, he talked about Watergate
compilation.
a ton. Like, he just talked about everything that anytime something happened, he would then talk about it.
Mort Sahl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the closest? Do we have anybody that working similar to that now.
Probably Jake Flores, maybe.
Probably Jake Flores. Yeah.
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 Jamie Kilstein.
Our favorite comedian. Our other favorite comedian.
No, probably nobody actually. You know.
I mean, maybe Bill Burr a little bit because
No.
he does seem to. Well, he talks about. It
He's
does
just
seem like
making
there's some-
jokes, though. You know. I
Well,
think.
you know, Jake Flores was the first
but-
comedian to just like bring a wooden board and some nails on stage as props and riff on that and kind of do bits with that.
Yeah, I saw him working that out, and I feel like he really nailed it.
Sean, on the Patreon, didn't you bring up Garrison on the last Patreon? Because Mike is doing shows in New Orleans this weekend.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And we started making fun of you, and then it turns out we do a whole episode about
Jake
Mort Sahl,
Flores, he's
who-
more of a screwball comedy type of guy.
Oh, screw. Yeah, I get it.
Jake Flores. I'm gonna text Mullen that.
There was
Yeah,
actually
that's great.
Jake Flores is.
there's a Roger Ailes was the guy who ran Fox News before he died, but he knew Mort Sahl, or he said once he went and like sat down with Mort Sahl and just saw him like read the day's newspaper. You know, over lunch or whatever, and he said he went and saw him that evening, and he had like a full night's worth of material just on that newspaper.
Good. I'm glad you said that.
You know, and it's like Jake Flores can do the same thing when he walks into Home Depot and just gets like a nail gun and like just various things to put through his testicles. He can have a whole night's material on that.
Yeah, it's like he's doing carpool karaoke with James Corden, and they're just going to Lowe's.
How does he hit these high notes?
Oh, man. But
They're just on their way back from Ace Hardware after getting some props.
I'm glad you brought that up because, yeah, in terms of his material, so I guess wherever, I forget where the fuck he lived and eventually died, but he would go to the local, like, bodega newspaper place, and the guy said he would come every other day and spend between $30 to $40 on newspapers and magazines. Every
Wow.
other day.
Yeah.
He'd buy a variety of just no matter what it was, he'd buy it, which I guess also includes like the fucking nudie mags and shit, right? And but he would buy up everything, and then the guy said Mort, it was the only customer he would allow to do this. Mort would pay at the end of the month because he would buy so much shit. But yeah, $30 to $40 every other day in papers and shit, and he would read them, and then those were his jokes. And it's not like, oh, this, like, it's actually funny, actually a guy. It was probably like going to see a podcast because it's just a guy talking about whatever happened that week, you know?
Right.
But he didn't curse. He didn't curse, which is interesting.
No, it's. I think a big difference between Mort Sahl and a podcast is Mort Sahl does research and show prep.
Yeah. Well, this is.
No, we did. We watched a documentary, and Scott
Yeah.
also watched a documentary.
Yeah, I had a lot of gay sex to research the
Are you reading on the road
cool
right now?
jazz of the 1950s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading On the Road. I'm reading Bound for Glory by Woody Guthrie.
Wow.
And I'm still trying to get through Notes from Underground. I'm reading a few other things, but this is all I had.
I remember I read On the Road in high school, and I like got in a fight with my dad because I wanted to eat a slice of pie for lunch, and my dad said no
What does that
because
have
he
to
eats
do with
pie.
On the
He eats
Road?
apple pie. He eats apple pie for like
Oh,
all his
okay.
meals.
Yeah, okay.
And I was like, oh, I can't eat pie because I was like, I can't eat pie because
Pie is actually a metaphor
No.
for dudes' assholes.
Yeah, your dad
So
knew.
your dad was saying that.
Your dad knew
Yeah.
apple pie was a code word at the rest stop off I-95.
my dad just ripped up the book in front of me. I was, Dad, no.
But you got to read this like all jazzy and shit, or otherwise it's like annoying.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta
remember.
make sure you're only around other white people when you read it. You have to segregate yourself to really get in the mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just
You should read it in Bushwick.
well, dude, that's
Yeah.
what so like Jack Kerouac. I mean, to wrap up this episode, over fucking long, we didn't even talk about Kerouac. We talked about Mort Sahl, but I never knew like what beat meant, And one was one of the guys they bought drugs from. He'd be like, "Man, I'm beat." It's like, okay, yeah. But it's also beat something which is like a type of. I wrote it down somewhere. Beatification, which is like it's the type of like the type of beauty that people who who experience heaven get to feel. But anyway, Jack Kerouac explained it as like compassionate or something like that, or of like they what is that word that they use in Bohemian Rhapsody?
I don't know.
Come on.
Scaramouche.
He says, don't, come on, there's a word in it.
A word?
Yeah.
Fandango?
No!
There's a lot of words in Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, but the come on, don't,
Just
it's like an English word.
Use a synonym, Scott.
No, I'm trying to bring Bohemian Rhapsody into it for no fucking reason. Anyway, what was I saying? What were we talking about?
Beautification, Kerouac.
Oh, anyway, yeah, all these guys had fucking money, which I didn't know. They all kind of came from money, and that's what a beat is. What it seems to me. Why you say, when he was like, you got to be around white people to read it. It's like white people who are who were sympathetic to the plights of others, whereas like that had never existed before. And then they were like, hey, we're beats. We're people who It's not sympathy. It's not sympathize with. But it's come on. It's in Bohemian Rhapsody. Anyway, plug your New Orleans dates. Mort Sahl worked in New Orleans and solved the Kennedy assassination, but no one wants to talk about it except us, out for smokes. Our Patreon will be discussing Dick Gregory.
All right, well, I will be in Lafayette Friday night and New Orleans Saturday night, and then I'll be in Austin, Texas on Sunday night. And you can get all those tickets at MikeRacineComedy.com. And, guys, why don't you join us over on the Patreon? We're going to continue this conversation about Dick Gregory and Mort Sahl, and we'll see you over there.
Wait, I'll go through Dick Gregory's biography, a bit of that on the Patreon. But, I do wish the listeners could see whatever Scott's show notes look like. Yeah, that kind of, it went pretty well for a while. And
hey,
then
these were really good show notes.
And then it just ends with, just kind of like stall for 2 minutes while you try to remember the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody.
Wait, so the word...
there was a big word you didn't know
the
in
word
it?
in Bohemian Rhapsody is sympathy, but it's not... It's not.
It's got the word sympathy.
Dude, Google is so fucking... Google has become dumber than us. Ready? So I just typed in Bohemian Rhapsody lyrics. So now I'm writing, what did Kerouac say? And I'm going to say... beat meant, right? But they go, what did Kerouac say about Bohemian Rhapsody? Google, he didn't say anything about it. He's fucking dead from alcoholism by then.
Well, if you want any evidence that weed is getting stronger, we saw Scott hit a vape and then forget the word sympathy existed.
He's a fucking lie. Now it is about being poor? Bullshit. It's a bunch of rich kids, man, who are sympathetic to the plights of, Okay.
All right. Well, I'll see you in
the 50s.
Right. Patreon.com/out4smokes.
We're talking Dick Gregory. More jazz.
We'd love to see you over there. See you on the Patreon, everybody. Bye-bye.